others. It'll be available for others who aren't able to attend live. Again, my name is Melissa Raspberry, and I have the honor and privilege of working for the American Institutes for Research, which is based in Washington, D.C., but I work from home remotely in Durham, North Carolina. It's not quite as hot as it is in Phoenix, but it's been, I think we are nearly breaking the record here with having 20 plus days of 90 plus degree weather. So certainly it's a hot one. We're in for the long haul here. We are excited tonight to have this such an important conversation. Leon Times has been working with us this year as one of our community ambassadors, and in some conversations with him, we were brainstorming ideas that sort of addresses a lot of the issues that we've been facing over the past few months. And certainly that I should say this, that have come to light over the past few months, but certainly have been issues that we've been facing for years. And that is the inequities often found in education, but even particular to computer science directly. And so he was wonderful to help us organize this conversation tonight around computing while Black. And listening to perspectives and best practices from those in the field who have done some wonderful work about how to attract, retain, and support students of color, particularly Black students in computer science. In this conversation tonight, we want to have a few guiding norms. And with those norms, we know that there may be some times that you're feeling a little uncomfortable in the conversation. So we figured let's keep it simple and kind of have some basic understandings. One, and that is to listen for understanding. So oftentimes when we're part of conversations, we can also often be listening and ready for a rebuttal or a reply or a response. But really, we encourage you all to think and listen to try to hear and understand what is being shared by our panelists tonight. We hope and feel confident that you will respect differences of opinion and perspective. We all come from different backgrounds, and what may be my truth may not be your truth. And so that's part of the beauty in being able to have conversations like this, is that you can better understand one another through those differences of opinion. And something that I was told many, many years ago by a long-term educator is to assume good intentions. So even if there's something that you hear, assuming that someone has good intentions in what they're saying, even if it may not come out just right or may be uncertain, assuming that they're stating that with good intentions can go a long way. And then finally, I just mentioned a guiding norm. Let's be kind to one another, and being kind even to ourselves, and just giving, opportunity to have grace and space to be able to have these conversations. Thank you to everyone so far who has taken the time to introduce yourself in the chat box. We would love to know who you are, your role, where you come from, and I'm already excited to see names that I'm familiar with, and also lots of new names as part of this discussion. Leon has developed a set of questions that he's going to ask of our panelists, and then we can have some time for some open dialogue. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Leon to do some introductions for us. So Leon?
Thank you so much, Melissa. We have a really amazing, esteemed panel tonight. Some will be a little bit late because people are conducting business still on the West Coast and other places, but they will pop in. I've had the pleasure to meet and work with most of this list of people. Ken Shelton is traveling right now, so he will not be present. But let's start with Mary Jo. Oh my gosh, what a trailblazer in CS and in education altogether. What I consider a mentor, a definite friend, and it's great to have her and her voice here tonight, because she really does focus on diversity and equity at Google, and definitely at EdSurge. Her voice is massive. Peta-Gay Clarke, met her through Mary Jo. Works with Mary Jo, an amazing energy, worked with her a few weeks ago. I am proud to be in the presence in the same space as this person, and definitely leading the way for people of color in coding and making sure that our young people are getting what they need. Give me 1 second.
Gotta love the motion sensor.
Gotta love the classroom. Gotta love it.
Yeah.
So Donna Knutt, I've been following her through her work with Black Girls Code and her voice in coding. specifically with young Black women. And that's kind of what we need, definitely, to diversify the workspace and the tech workspace. And her empowerment is just immeasurable. And I'm happy to have her here with us as well. David Lockett, what can I say about David? Everyone teases me about getting awards. This dude right here. So stop teasing me and go talk to David and follow him on Twitter. He just got the Einstein Distinguished Fellowship Award. It's just astonishing what he's doing in the STEM and CS space, and I'm very proud to have him here. Chantell, oh, dude, those hard days, those hard times, she's the one that texts me and says, hey, you got to pull through it. You got to get through it, and you've got to do more. She's, we need that in our CS spaces because we're left out here. A lot of us are not CS majors. She is a PBS digital innovator with me. That's where I met her in 2016, and Steve. And just ever since then, we've always just bounced ideas. Yes, we are going to write that book. So I'm definitely honored to have her here. Steve Isaacs, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? This guy was getting the PBS Digital Innovator Award and an INSTI Award at the same time. And he pushed me so hard to move forward. I've totally followed him. I consider him a mentor as well. And just amazed to have him in the same space here. Juli Ross-Kleinmann, talk about always dragging me with her. She told me ever since I met her, she's going to call on me to do things with her. And she hasn't backed down from that. She is definitely a tour de force in tech and in computer science and STEM on the East Coast. I value her. I was able to work with her about a year or so ago, and it was just tremendous, the energy. So these are all heavy hitters. And I see Peta, yes, with the red hair. Thank you for coming. Love you. Thank you. So we have a set of questions, but we're not going to necessarily stay on that track. It depends on the chat. It depends on feedback. And we need the feedback, guys, because I don't think any of us, even though we're panelists, have the answer for some of these questions or the best answer. So sometimes the best solution is a collective solution. So I definitely don't have it. So I'm going to tell you right now, I may not have the best feedback. That's why we're meeting today. And this is the only way that we're going to truly produce an inclusive environment for our students of color, particularly African Americans. So let's start with question 1. And this is a big one. How do we change the mindset of CS teachers that have always taught the traditional white male group of students interested in STEM and computer science? Tough one. Any one of the panelists? Let's see. I'm gonna put Juli. Come on, bring it.
You're gonna put me on the spot first,
I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay, so I have to. I brought up the question I'm looking at. How do we change the mindset of teachers that have always taught traditional white male groups of students? I think the mindset needs. Well, see, there's some systemic issues in there that I think needs to be unpacked first. And so, I've been asked this question when I was interviewed for different jobs. How do we get more kids of color into STEM and computer science? I said, well, you need teachers that look like the kids so that they can have a better understanding of what's happening. And so we need more educators in the systems so that students can see different people, but so that our colleagues can work with and see others as well. So that's kind of a systemic issue. I don't know how to solve that other than to try to keep doing what I'm doing and work with people like everyone who's here. But definitely students need to see more people that look, they need to be able to see someone that looks like them, and then they need to see people who don't look like them, that look through the window and that look through the mirror.
That's powerful. I'm going to pick on Chantell because she's nodding her head a little too hard over there. And then giving that diverse perspective on this, because I know you work with a big population of color. What are the kids saying to you about this?
I mean, first, Julie, I'm in agreement with everything you're saying. And as a white educator, what I can do personally and what I purposefully do is be on any interview committees and that are in my building to push and ensure that there's a diversity of those that are being interviewed, and that when things come up, statements like, well, in my gut, I just felt, no, we don't do in my gut feelings. I want facts. And really pushing those kinds of statements to the side to help, like Julie is saying, so that we do have educators of color for our students to be able to see themselves in the space. And while I'm not a educator of color, I pull in as many resources from my region that I can, speakers, those that are doing real live work with jobs and all of those aspects, so that all of my students can see themselves in the job, for sure. So that was, as Julie was talking, especially about having educators of color so our students can see themselves. It's, as a white educator, I feel like my job is to break down as many of those systemic things as possible, and ignoring the things like, well, we've always done it this way. That's a problem that we need to speak up on.
All right, I'm looking at Peta. She's a little too quiet there, so I'm going to put her on blast real quick. You're in kind of like a different space than a lot of the educators that are on a panel. What is your feeling regarding this?
Yeah, I think it starts with education. There's something we've had to do here at Google and a lot of the programs that we run, it starts with anti-bias training. It starts with anti-racist training. And it starts with an understanding between the difference of equality versus equity. I think a lot of Googlers that we work with, predominantly white, that, come into our workshops and our facilitating or even mentoring, they start with a deficit mindset. They think that, the students are, they're the white saviors of, the experience, and they're trying to, but they don't understand that you have to approach it with an asset mindset. These students have a lot to bring, and usually once they leave the experience, that's the perception they have of the communities that we're serving. And so I think all of this needs to happen. A lot of schools are already doing anti-bias training, but there's a difference between anti-bias and anti-racist.
Do you think it's too late? I mean, we talk about BLM, and all of this is centered around, the recent events. But are we really backtracking? Shouldn't this have already been done like a couple decades ago? I mean, and can we sustain that can we train people and get them up and running into this anti-racist training and mindset now? Like what is like the ETA? These are just questions I'm throwing out. I don't have the answers, but
yeah.
Like, is it too late, or is it, I mean, I could be bitter. You know what I mean? I could say, wow, the person next door to me needs anti-racist training, and you're going to be on block for 5 years because you should have really done this a long time ago. So how do we navigate that as colleagues when we do have someone in our spaces that is just not kind of where they need to be on that big issue, especially with educating kids, particularly in STEM, because the representation's not there. Let me see who I'm gonna pick on. Donna turned on her camera and turned it off. Turn it back on. We want to see you. I mean, what do you think, Mary Jo? I don't know.
I guess I'm thinking specifically of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who's a teacher in Los Angeles. His name is LeBron James, believe it or not. He spells it Lybron. He really wants everybody to always know that. He was the original LeBron James, he likes to say. But he said something to me a couple of weeks ago when I talked to him that I thought was pretty interesting, which was, I think this is similar to are we too late? And he said that in comparing the Black Lives Matter protests that have happened now to the Rodney King protests that he experienced when he was a fresh college graduate teaching in Watts in downtown Los Angeles, he's like, back then, the community of people that were protesting, it was a largely Black contingent. Now, what I see as a Black teacher, saying his words, sharing his words, is that it is much more, there's a larger diverse population that seems to be sort of longer term engaging in this work. And so, in a sense, I think what he said sort of mirrors the space, which is that it does seem like there are more people that are starting to wake up. But I want to plus one to what Peta said earlier, which is that it really does come down to willingness on the part of the folks that are involved in training teachers to offer and encourage spaces of anti-racism training and like active participation in that and holding each other accountable. I'll like give a example. Like we had a Code Next offsite a couple of months ago, and I was describing our student body, and I said, trying to remember exactly what I said. I said, you know, blah, 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 we're talking about going in and giving these kids opportunities, like giving them the skills that they need. And my colleague, Vanessa, she called me out. She was like, it's not that we're giving them the opportunities. They have the potential. Like, it was kind of my deficit mindset, like the vestiges of that coming out through my words. And she told me, she like got me to own my shit, and I appreciated it. But more importantly, like I listened to what she said, and we talked about it since then. And so it's kind of like you start someplace and then you keep building off of that. It's not just like a one and done. You keep going from there. So I'm optimistic.
Can I plus one that? You know, just sharing what Nipsey Hussle's words, it's a marathon. You know, this is not like a one and done. And if I think about sort of like the former activists and John Lewis, if they thought at their time that, you know, it was too late, then we wouldn't be where we are today. So I think we have to continue to push. We need a certain level of compassionate fortitude, I want to say, to just be mindful of where folks are in that journey and just keep pushing forward. You know.
All right, I'm going to go to the next question because you guys did a great job on that first one, and I didn't have an answer, so I'm bowing down to you. So if Melissa, can you show question number 2 on the screen? I think a lot of you are very familiar with Dr. Chris Emdin, who's very outspoken regarding issues of race and equity. And Chantell was one of the ones to get him to send me a little fan message. Thank you so much. In a 2016 interview with BET, Dr. Chris Emdin stated that PBL was successful for Black students pre-integration. Is PBL the answer to increase CS engagement with Black students? I am going to pick on David, first of all, because he's Black, and then I'm going to Steve because he does something special in his classroom. David, take it away. What do you think?
You know, when I'm a STEM and computer science teacher, and when I think about project-based learning and engaging students, how can we close that gap? What new opportunities can we integrate within our classrooms to involve not only Black students, but all students? You know, how can we do that? You know, you always think about the psychology of success. You want all students to succeed. You want to give them those opportunities that sometimes they wouldn't normally have. With project-based learning, you can engage students in a different way, of course, a hands-on way. You're catering to their differences, you're catering to their needs, and you're giving them a new opportunity to grow. With project-based learning, you know, you are engaging on a different level with different factors. You know, you're really finding those different points to make all students succeed.
Okay, Steve, you do something very special in your courses, and there's another question tailored to you too. In your experience, how would you respond to this? Because you definitely do something special in your program.
Well, thank you. So first off, when it comes to, you know, it's funny too, because we often, project-based learning and problem-based learning, you know, are both PBL, and they're intermixed, and I think, you know, mean sort of the same thing, but different, but they both apply very strongly. You know, in my class, choice is at the center of everything, right? And I have to believe that that allows, all students to have opportunities. I think when we honor people's interest and we give them opportunities for different pathways, and also when we have opportunities, like, so I teach game design and development, and the game design industry has so many different roles. So one of the things, in that environment is that kids can really, find and nurture a passion within that doesn't have to be what they walked in the door thinking that was going to be. So I think that's powerful. I think with also PBL, when we're talking like from that problem-based learning, a little bit of a distinction. I think when people see that they're coming up with a solution or, to something that's relevant to them, or even either way, we're talking PBL, when projects and activities are meaningful to students, I think we are always going to win. So to answer the question, I think absolutely. And I think it, what it does is it honors students, and I can't see what we could do better than that. So yeah, that's, it's a strong opportunity if presented correctly.
Okay, so now I'm going to get the infamous Donna Knutt involved in this conversation, because I need to know, is Chris Emden right in what he said regarding historically talking about pre-integration and that model educationally when the schools were not integrated, pre-segregation? What is your opinion about the strength of PBL prior to desegregation?
So I can't really speak to the experience pre-segregation, but I can speak to at least what I have experienced and my work with students. So even I'll give you an example where, like with Code Next here at Google, a lot of what we do is centered around project-based learning. Even, me as a coder, learning was always attached to a project. And if you want to learn Python, you want to learn any kind of language, you always sort of found this passion project that you had to attach it to that takes you through this journey of learning. So for me, I feel like this is an approach that, one, you're gaining interest from the students because they're naturally just drawn to whatever it is. And you're getting that type of like interaction, and you allow them to start like the like light bulbs to start going off as they're learning. So as opposed to like just throwing something on them and then forcing them to learn through things. And I think we just need to recognize like there's this uniqueness to learning. I think David mentioned it earlier. There's no one student has this linear way of learning. And if we recognize that and really hone in on that, we could sort of find the things that we could like, yes, you're teaching one class and you can't be an octopus and trying to figure out all the student needs. But if we find that these projects that are that they can incline to, we could have this overall or overarching message, but still allow individuality as we're teaching.
I don't know which Ken this is, but he put something in the chat that's really interesting. He said he's had several family members who shared that their learning was actually more meaningful and relevant pre-Brown versus Board of Education and took on much less relevance post. Very interesting. Thank you for answering that, because, I wasn't alive. Oh, it's Ken Shelton. He's here. Thank you. Yeah, that's kind of where I was. It's like I asked this question because it was like I didn't know if that was an actual true fact.
Leon?
Yes.
It's Julie. So I one of the things that I did was teach history of education and undergraduate and graduate courses at a local university. There is that taming of the savage, even with Native Americans and the, Protestants who want to make sure that we're educating the uneducated. And so that when you're bringing new students into a mix of something that's unfamiliar to you, there is that kind of, you know, well, I don't know if they can do it, or maybe you should just watch, or so there was that kind of attitude of not, well, as we know, not being inclusive, even though we're saying that, you know, we're supposed to be inclusive. You're on mute, Leon.
Sorry about that. But I really wanted to bring this question because I saw this like a few months ago, and I really wanted to bring that so that people can kind of understand that, first of all, PBL is not new. Number two, that it was in our communities prior to, you know, the newer wave of PBL and being involved in it. Something that we have to have in classes with diverse people, and it's a really great point of engagement. So I'm going to go to question. Was that question 3 already? No, let's go to question 3, because this is a bone of contention for me. And yes, I'm an AP teacher, so I'm going to read this. Commonly, AP CSP and CSA are the only CS offerings in many high schools. Yeah, I see some of y'all nodding your heads. The only. What other types of CS courses should be offered to engage more Black students? Someone said ECS. Love that.
Can I jump in first?
Yes, ma'am.
Leon? This is a big soapbox. It's not just the CS courses. The first thing that needs to happen is getting rid of the prereqs required to get to those CS courses in high school.
There you go.
A student shouldn't need algebra in order to take a CS class. Personally, I have a math learning disability, but I'm a coder. I teach students how to code, and I do computer science. But I would have needed a prereq of algebra in order to get into those classes in high school. And looking at our AP score, specifically in Missouri, for the number of Black students, now it looks great on code.org site where it says, hey, 250% of our student increase in the number of Black students that took the AP computer science test in Missouri.
Right.
Looking down into it, it equated to about 3 students. 3. And part of that is the systemic issue, like Julie was talking about. There's just so many of them. But one being, in order to even get into these classes, students have to, and I don't know about in other districts, but in mine in particular that I can speak to get into algebra on that track, they have to take a test in 6th and 7th grade. A lot of students have tutors to pass that test to take 8th grade algebra when they're in 7th grade. It's like immediately getting that next step. So first, those prereqs need to go in order for those other courses to then exist. But I said it's my soapbox. So
Chantell, I'm going to put you back on blast because I don't understand those prereqs for things like, you know, and I'm a mobile CSP master teacher, but come on now, you're telling me that they can't block code and they need algebra to block code? Are you serious?
And you're telling me that this couldn't then help with algebra struggles, is learning how to code. All of that breaking down, that computational thinking, that should go hand in hand. It shouldn't be well, first you need to do this before you can do the hands-on of computer science. No, CS can help with that.
Exactly, but Peta and Mary Jo and Donna knows that AP CSP test, very little of it is actually text-based coding. They are using block. You do not need algebra for that.
And yet, for some reason, we continue in schools, in public schools I can speak to make that a prerequisite of algebra on top of whatever other prerequisite you want to make it seem.
And look, we're
losing so many kids.
Ken is telling that we need to be teaching algebra through this block code, through these algorithms. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, you're right. The system is not centered around the student. It's, you know, AP, first of all, let's break down AP. AP is, they want their bar here, or they perceive that their bar is there. So when you have
Right.
high schools that have just AP as, oh, you're going to take CSP and then CSA, which we know, first of all, there's a big gap between the two of those courses. And then you're going to say, oh, we're just going to use this sequence and that's it. It excludes so many people. It excludes so many people, not just with the prereqs, but it just excludes them, period, because I have this AP brand. Let's talk about that. That AP brand, who am I going to pick on? Julianne, come on.
Okay, thank you. Wow, did you know? Because I was like,
this AP brand, I think
first off,
those two letters are a barrier. First of all, I love working with my AP because, you know, I transformed my AP class. My AP class was inclusive. We worked with other classes and, you know, that were non-AP, you know, my app development class that was non-AP. So we did a whole bunch of different things. But what I'm saying is those two words are a barrier for race in high schools in general. Doesn't matter what level we're talking about.
So I'm reading Omar's chats in the or text in the chat box, however you say it, and go back to Chantell. So first off, computational thinking needs to start back here in kindergarten. It needs to not be an isolated thing. Educational technology is not an afterthought. In June, now I have time, I can do this code.org thing or whatever. It needs to start in kindergarten, but it needs to be throughout all content. It's not in isolation. It's taught through an all content. Through abstraction and decomposition, I can learn how to write. I can learn math. I can learn science. So there's some more of that systemic issue because it's not on a test, you know, and I can't check it off. People have that fear that if I teach this way and add the PBL, that I'm not going to get to the answers on the test, not recognizing your kids will surpass that test and more. They'll be writing the test and reading the test for the errors if you teach them the other way. So the content needs to be integrated all the way out. And you're right, and you asked if my husband was here, he just actually walked in the house. He sees those issues at the college level, right? So I need to take these courses before I can take these courses. Everyone doesn't learn that way. My husband is extremely intelligent. He doesn't learn that way either, and neither do I. And everyone has all their different strengths. So I'm gonna stop talking because I can keep going on forever. But yeah, no, we need to look at the ways in which we're tracking classes and students who are not able to reach these other high-level coursework because of the names we put on it and the tests that we give. I'm gonna be quiet now.
Mary Jo just put something in the chat talking about a multiple choice question.
I was gonna, if I could jump in a little bit here, Leon, as well. You know, one thing I do believe strongly is when we put that AP label on it, one of the other issues I think that I have is I think we start to feel like we're focusing a whole lot of energy on teaching to the test and preparing kids for the test. So that's a problem right there. The systemic, barrier that was brought up, totally great point. Even quite honestly, like in our district, I don't think there's a computer science principles course that's not the AP CSP. And I don't really understand that because computer science principles to me doesn't feel like it has to be or is, intended to be that, it's supposed to, I think, introduce kids, and all of that. So again, when we put that AP on it, I think we scare many people away, including my own two daughters who, were not interested in computer science. And I'm sure a lot of it was they're like, we're not ready to go into this. We wouldn't even consider this AP thing. One of the things you touched on, Leon, which I think is brilliant, is like that app development course you spoke of. There are so many opportunities for kids to develop apps where they're using, computer science principles without a doubt, but doesn't have to be hardcore coding. I'll speak, all night about game design as being an opportunity to introduce kids who are interested. All of my kids get a taste of computer science, but my course is anything but a computer science course. And I make that very clear, and everybody is welcome. There are not even anything close to a prerequisite because there are so many roles, and available opportunities there. Robotics was brought up in the chat. What a great hands-on way for people who want to really dig in and get excited about computer science because they see what's happening. So I think these electives and these different pathways are so important. And if we're, if we're in a district or a school that just drills those 2 AP classes and that's our computer science program, we're failing many people.
We could talk about this all day, but I'm going to move to the next question, and I'm going to target Peta. She's going to hate me after this, but we just talked about this a few weeks ago. How must teachers approach and engage families in order to increase enrollment and a sustained interest in CS classes for Black students? Oh.
Yeah, that's something we learned early on with the Code Next program. When we started the program, there weren't a lot of parents that had an understanding of what the computer science pathway is. Even my parents, I ended up being a software engineer, but my mom, I'm first generation. She came from Jamaica. The only thing they knew about is being a doctor and maybe a lawyer, and that was it. And so when we were doing our outreach to get students to participate in the Code Next program, we had to do a lot of educating. And then even after we got their sort of like buy-in, we had to start continuously host family engagement sessions and bringing experts to talk to parents so they understand what this pathway looks like and what the economic impact of becoming a computer scientist is. We've seen the data, 1.1 million jobs in how many years, and starting salaries for computer science is scientists is 6 figures, and a lot of families don't know that. But imagine if all the kids within our communities ended up with those 6-figure jobs, what the economic impact would be for that community. And so when you start to frame it like that and then walk them through the pathway and what that looks like, it really does help to get sustained and retention in this program.
I want to shift a little bit because Naya, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. She's at Indiana University. I met her when I received an award there. She was looking into teacher-mediated versus student-centered perspectives for CT scaffolding. And I want to answer that and talk about that and maybe make it a jumping off point because everything in my class is student-centered. I may give them broad parameters, but everyone's working on projects. Everyone is learning code. I'm learning code. Hello. There's depending on what the student's innovation or desired innovation is, I now have to learn the code for that specific function. And so when they see that flexibility in my class, they go, wow, you really don't know this part. And I'm like, no, I don't know. You're going in a direction I've never gone in. So I think that for me, I know for Steve, we have that, whatever their project is, Chantell, I think does the same thing. We go in that direction, and it really is a student-led conversation about the scope of their projects and their ideas. And as long as they present it, as long as they research it, yes, they have to research it. As long as they do that, then we can go in that direction. You will not be creating those silly, and Steve, you know what I'm saying, silly little shoot 'em up video games up in my classroom. It's not happening. Your thing has to have a purpose, and it has to have a reason behind that purpose. Find the problem, and then we can look at, potential solutions using technology. So Naya, I wanted to address that. And even to tie it back into this question number 4, families. I let my families know when their children are working on projects and what the scope of those projects are. Like your child is working on a wearable to track homeless health and homeless, migration patterns. Hello? I'm going to message you and make sure you know what your child is doing and how amazing of an idea it is, because I'm always astonished at what the kids come up with, because I do not allow, I give them broad strokes, but they better be complicated strokes. They're not going to be simple strokes. Oh yeah, shoot that widget, or, you know, move that sprite. Not in my class. Not allowed, not going to happen. Steve, you're the same way. Chantell, David, what do you do? Are you the same mindset?
You know, I have the same mindset when you are, you know, promoting that real world learning, when you're promoting those authentic experiences. You know, a lot of times when you're working on these projects, we worked on the NASA Space Apps Challenge. We had 2 apps back to back that were global nominees. You know, my students were shocked when they saw what the apps entailed, where the idea came from. You know, providing those opportunities, you know, looking here at the chat as well, and impacting your community, you know, providing those opportunities and showing, you know, all students, you know, that, hey, you know, your teacher's capable of this, you know, you're capable of this, you know, and they're seeing that diversity. That gives them, you know, the prowess, you know, to want to go on and move on to new things, you know, and say, hey, I can do this.
So we got another question, and it says, will we be talking about the experience of a Black kid in a CS classroom full of mostly white students? And excuse me, I was one of them. Let me see, high school, college, 4 times in grad school, always the only one. So I want to get some opinions as to, because I know Mary Jo and Peta and Donna have had extensive conversations beyond what we can do what a classroom teacher can do, because they have an after school program. What is your response to that question, one of you?
I guess I can start that off, and then Donna and Peta, feel free to jump in. I'm thinking a lot about what we heard from some of the parents that we did a focus group with yesterday about what they feel like is most impactful for their children. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've heard horror stories about students going into I won't name any programs by name, but like especially after school computing programs where they're the only Black female student in the program, and they just feel completely like out of their element because there's no one there who's asking them how they feel, relating to them, like none of that. I think mentorship is kind of a big key element in this space, and it's not just for that's really for any situation, whether it's a large community of Black and brown students or whether you are the sole individual. But being able to see someone who looks like you, who comes from a similar demographic, is huge. And yesterday when we were talking with the parents, you know, the big thing they said was like, the biggest trouble for us right now is that in the midst of COVID, when he or she is at home, they're feeling very disconnected from any community that they were a part of before. So what I want for my student is I want them to be able to talk with a Google software engineer who is Black, who is Latino, Hispanic, like someone who can relate to them on that fundamental level and essentially talk with them about things that like I as a parent can't even talk about them with. And I think that goes a lot as well for being the sole individual of like whatever racial, ethnic, socioeconomic background in a crew of white students would merit. But I'm curious to hear Donna and Peta's take on that.
So definitely +1 what you said, MJ. I think definitely having mentors who could actually sit with the students and give them like the real life experience of what that is like. But I think just to give you an example of what we do at CodeNet. So we've actually had something called a day in the life of, and that is where Googlers, anybody who has been, whether they're software engineers, UX designers, it doesn't matter. They come and they're actually just walking you through their day-to-day experience in life. But they didn't just stop there and talk about like, oh, this is what I do today and this is what I do with my team. They went completely raw and they shared like the details of coming to a predominantly Caucasian company and how that feels. And then the imposter syndrome that comes up, even though you're completely qualified and you know your stuff. So I think the students even like being open and to hearing that and hearing the real side of what's happening. It also made us cognizant of the fact like we can't just teach code. We have to teach the life skills, the other parts that go with that, so that when they do show up in these spaces, they don't run or they don't feel like I don't belong and try to go somewhere else. So I think it's hugely important to have mentorship, that they're able to see someone else that looks like them and someone that speaks to the real experiences. Because if they don't have that and they go into these spaces, the disconnect happens and then they feel like they're doing something wrong or they didn't get it right. So definitely mentorship, definitely seeing, having people come in and tell their stories more, I think that was super impactful.
For me, with Ranjani, what he's saying, one of my a few years ago, I think 2018, my AP CSP class, I had a whole group of white boys that were all talking about Yale, Harvard, MIT, and blah 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 blah. Well, my GPA is 4.6. I had to shut that down. I had to shut that down because I had a whole group of students that were looking at them like, do we even belong here? And wanted to drop the course and had those concerns. And it's just like Melissa put in the chat, classroom culture. We are in this together. You will be working in teams in my classroom. You will respect ideas and perspectives, and you will definitely respect people's culture, people's religion, and definitely people's race. We are not having that up in here. And that's where exactly what Melissa said, and Ranjani, I think you were questioning about that. It really does come down to setting a classroom culture that every voice is valued. Every single voice is valued, and you're not going to allow the noise of others to kind of suppress the other ones. And where I choose who speaks in my classroom, hello? And I'm going to balance it out to make sure voices are respected and heard in an equitable way. So you don't just blurt, I control that. And if you do, we're going to have a different conversation. So we do have to manage our classes differently than, just letting a certain group of people or a certain, and it could be boys versus girls too. But instead of letting somebody drown the space of other people that are timid or intimidated because this kid's talking about a 4.7 GPA. Hello, I didn't have that.
Leon,
yes.
I want to thank you so much for that point, and I love the question that was raised here, and really do appreciate Chris Busba, or I'm saying the last name incorrect. He's saying, who can we connect with? He's a white teacher. He's looking to connect. He wants to make sure that his students get that. What do you all, those of you in industry, those of you still in the classroom, what do you say to white teachers who want to improve, who want to make sure? We all know and are in agreement, representation matters, but if you don't have that in your own network, where do you find that connection? What are the ways? I have a few ideas, but I certainly would love to hear from you all as well.
Your platform, Melissa. Hello. CS for All Teachers is one of the platforms, definitely research and reach out I'm not going to put y'all. Yeah, I'm going to put you on blast. Mary Jo, Donna, and Peter are always around to have discussions and will facilitate those discussions any day. At ISTE, we have Juli Ross-Kleinmann. Become members of these associations, and there are people there that Steve Isaac, you can find his email. I'm not giving it out now, but you can definitely find it. David, you can find his email out because he does enough training. And if you have Twitter, you better text Ken. You better message Ken because he's a huge equity warrior out in this educational space. And you better text him and just ask the question. I'm on Twitter. I think almost all of us are on Twitter. Just ask the question, just message, take that courageous step and just ask. I'm not going to beat you down because you're a white teacher. Look, Mary Jo's one of my good friends. Chantell, hello. We are diversity. We teach that and we agree with that. There goes my light. So somebody else speak. Mary Jo, what do you got?
I was just I put in a bunch of references to organizations that I think are also doing some pretty awesome work with connecting students to like individuals. My best friend Ariana is she is an LGBTQ Latinx software engineer. And I mentor connected her to an LGBTQ Latinx high school student. And that was something that for that student, I think really made a huge impact, because there was, they weren't only just able to have conversations about software engineering, computing, you know, she was working at YouTube at the time, but also they were able to talk about what it means to come out in a school or a professional setting. And so I think that organizations like that, National Society of Black Engineers is another one. I want to plus one to what Regina said. There is like, I've especially seen this with some of the college programs I've worked on at Google, like, you know, being a Kappa, being an Alpha, like a lot of those times those communities are incredibly like supportive of each other. Church is actually a good one, Julia.
Yes.
In there. Yeah, church is a great place. Peta mentioned, I remember we talked about Built by Girls today. So I think there's a lot of organizations out there, but I think the thing is like, who is going to reach out to who? And for many nonprofits, as big as they are, they're still relatively under-resourced. So ping them and see if they're interested. The other thing I'll say is like, I'll get sometimes requests from folks who are just like, hey, do you know anybody that could be a mentor? And I'm happy to like reach out to the communities that I'm a part of. So I just want to plus one what Leon said about like asking us for help, you know? Just the other day, my friend who works at Pixar was like, I want to do some tutoring. Do you have any like students that might be interested? You know, it's those soft connections that sometimes warrant and get you what you need.
I got one more, and I'm still looking at Peta because she looks like she's kind of bored over there. And Donna, I'm gonna tap you too, because this is big, because y'all got a good system going with Code Next, which I hope can roll out even further. But now we're talking about in schools and hierarchical, I can't even say the word, with a hierarchy in mind, you know, the school system. How can schools ensure that teachers are appropriately assessing and meeting the needs of Black students in the classroom? Oh my, that's big. That's big. Donna, come on.
Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
Okay, no. I was just going to say, like, the approach that we have here just at Google in general, and then what we've implemented at CodeNext is always to keep the student focused, or keep the user focused. So whoever you're building for, whoever you're creating for, get repetitive feedback, iterate over what you're doing. So everything that we do here, we have what we call design sprints, and we pull in the key people that are needed for these types of programs or things that we're building, and we're getting like what they're asking for. We're asking them, what do you want to see? What do you want this to look like? So for instance, we just launched a summer entrepreneurship program, right? And without us just sitting in silo building this, we pulled in nonprofits, we pulled in students that were gonna take this, we pulled in community counterparts, we pulled in Googlers, and we all sat down and brainstormed around this. So I think the focus is really like pulling in the community to get feedback first, so that you know how to speak to your audience, so that you know what their problems are. I think what we do is we build solutions in silos, and then we expect results. And then when we present, like, here, this is supposed to work, and we get crickets, we're like, well, why doesn't it work? And it's because you didn't include the people that you're building for. And so that's my approach. I feel that approach works. We iterate over it tons of times, and it's not something that will work right out the box sometimes. Sometimes you just have to keep iterating and keep fine-tuning until you get it. But that has worked for me and just us as a program.
Hey, you guys invited me on one of those, and wow, mind blown. Absolutely. Peta, you're unmuted. What's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, in terms of being practical, it's not easy. It requires effort. You know, this is something we've made a practice of, and we've committed to it. And, you know, after each day of lessons, we debrief together as a team, and we talk about what worked, what didn't work, and how can we improve going forward. So it requires effort to get it right. I think the other thing I would say is, you know, we can't look at this as a one-size-fits-all. You know, and like for students, one thing we learned very early on when we started CodeNext is that, you know, all Black students or students of color are not the same. They have varying interests, and as a result of technology and YouTube, and they surprise us every day with things that they're passionate about. They're interested in Japanese culture and all these things that just blows my mind. And so we were talking about project-based learning earlier, like how can we allow them to bring their cultures into the work that they do in the class? You know, I think that's what we need to really focus on.
Right. Steve, I need a teacher, dude. I need a teacher real quick. I mean, you and I have had our run-ins with admin.
So that's, you know, it's interesting because I was just typing in another question that I had around that. So I actually teach in a school that does not have a high population in terms of people of color, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens, in other words, you know, when that's the case, and that goes back to what Ranjani asked, you know, these are situations where I don't think it's top of mind for the admin. You could maybe say that what would be top of mind would be diversity and inclusion all around, but this is a different issue. So I don't have an answer, but I have more questions.
Right.
And my district, you know, in particular, because again, like in other words, what do we do? You know, it's so important to, again, I'm going to bring up Ranjani's question is, you know, and Regina mentioned it too, about having, you know, your child be maybe that only child, or having one or two kids. How do we elevate the importance of that? So I'm throwing it really back as a question.
And then Steve, what happens when they leave our classrooms? Because if they go to another classroom and that teacher doesn't believe in equity and inclusion,
right?
Did you just undo what I did?
Yeah, well, there's that for sure, but I'm thinking about the original question. I was perceiving the original question of hierarchy, like the admin side, like in other words, you know, like the admin being responsible. And maybe I'm misinterpreting part of the question.
No, you got it right. You got it right.
So in other words, in this person who, you know, isn't thinking about that, and how do we make that be, again, I'm going to just say top of mind because it's the easiest way I can think of it.
So,
okay, can Chantell take
for me?
Oh, go ahead.
Hold on. Well, get it in. Go ahead.
Julie, I really like you. I think we're like about to say the same things most of the time. You can go ahead first.
So I'll make it very brief. I was just going to say, I think we have to take it back to higher ed. So there needs to be that training in higher ed for admin. So there's a different focus when they're now in the building. And I mean, it's hard for admin too, right? Because they're at that mid-level, principal is a mid-level kind of job. And so it's got to be, you know, unfortunately it comes top down, but there has to be that training in higher ed as well.
So it can't just be on the teacher. We can't.
Unfortunately, the teacher doesn't always have the ability to do what they want, to do what's best.
So my perspective, I'm classroom teacher, run-ins with admin, not always, like it's really hard for them to argue back when you say, here's all my data that shows how great this has been for boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, for data collectors, for teachers, right? So I like that approach, but for me personally, to make it in their forefront and ignore my children, I have 3.
Right.
To put it in their forefront is if I know that I'm making enough noise when I've got some critics. Not that I throw myself out for hate all the time, but if there's no one questioning or wondering, I'm not being loud enough. I need to make sure I'm being loud enough because these are children. At the end of the day, these are all children. And when I hear things like, I'm scared of that student, and it's a 12-year-old, I'm sorry, you're scared of a 12-year-old? What has gone in your life where you're scared of a 12-year-old? And that goes back to the foundational thing that needs to happen is that ABAR work. And that as a white educator in particular, because that's all I can speak on, is figuring out your own implicit biases and where those lie and where your work needs to be, and not being afraid like Steve is asking, okay, so what do I do? And there's another gentleman in the group chat asking, what do I do? Those are the things that you should be doing if you're feeling lost. And jump on Twitter. It's all over. And once you start following folks, I know Leon and Mary Jo and Steve, like we put a ton of stuff out frequently just to get you, it can be overwhelming, but the world's overwhelming. And the kids can't wait for, you know, people to be comfortable, because that's why we're where we're at. Everybody's been comfortable too long. When I say everybody, I mean the white educators and the white students, for the most part, have been comfortable for too long. So it goes back to that AVAR work is the first thing has to happen to continue to move further. That's just the reality. And then the second thing is being a voice, not a white savior voice of what can I give them or what can I need. Like Mary Jo, I loved how you were completely vulnerable and said, here's where I was called out on something, how I put it, and here's why it was wrong. It's that kind of work that needs to be happening. And it's not a quick fix all. It's like Peter was saying, this is a marathon. This is a huge marathon. And
it's not one, and it's not one novel. You can't read one of Ibram Kendi's books and be woke and be centered. Like, come on now. Like everybody, oh, let's do a book circle. Okay, that's like foundational work. But that's not real work.
Right.
That's not
And
the
other,
you know, you read something. Okay, that's cute.
It's another thing too, where this is not a marathon that's going to have one winner.
Right.
And in our country in particular, because again, that's what I can speak to, is that's our mentality is I need to win. I need to be the best.
Right.
But this work, this is why it makes it uncomfortable, particularly for white educators and white students, because it's not about being the best.
And y'all are 80%. Hello. Just saying.
We talk about that a lot, Leon.
I know. Melissa, you want to take it home?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was going to say, we could be here all night, I'm sure. This has been amazing. I really appreciate the honesty, the candor, transparency that you all have shared. I had high hopes for this, and it wasn't anything to do with the panelists, but just, you know, I thought that this would be a good conversation, but it has passed all expectations, and I really do appreciate it and know that this won't be the final thing. Wasn't sure what would be next, but I know at least we've heard that there is interest in having conversations, another follow-up around how you set up classroom culture so that it is representative of all voices. So that for sure will be something we'll follow up. We also are talking about launching, and will be soon, an equity and CS group on our CS for All Teachers community that would be available for teachers K through 12. And it is, for those who aren't aware, CS for All Teachers is a free community space that anyone can join. So certainly we will follow up with this. Look for our Twitter. It's probably the best way if you aren't already a member of the community. Follow us on Twitter. I'll put that in the, or actually if my colleague Victoria is still online, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat box, but what our Twitter handle is. But yes, we just really appreciate you all being here. I think these are important conversations for us to have, and we will continue to do so in the future. The recording will be posted on our site. It will be connected to the event post, which actually, let me grab again and put into the chat window. But again, I just say thank you. Leon, thank you for putting together a wonderful panel of folks. I may be following up with a number of you all as we can think about different webinars in the future. But again, just thank you.
They're all awesome.
They are. And you are too, Leon. So
thank you,
round
guys.
of applause, everyone. Absolutely. You all have a great night, and we hope to see you around online. Take care.